Good Vayeitzei, and welcome to the shiur this evening, Motzei Shabbos, Parshas Vayeitzei. And I want to share with you some interesting things. First thing is not necessarily mamash halacha, but it was brought to my attention the following. In the back of the Tehillim, there is a kuntras about Amiras Tehillim. This was published in the year Tafshin Yud Gimel, 1953 approximately, and that was when the Tehillim with the Rishimus of the Tzemach Tzedek was published. You may recognize this volume. So this was published in the year Tafshin Yud Gimel, and in connection with this is notes of the Rebbe Tzemach Tzedek on the Tehillim, and in honor of this also was compiled a collection of letters of the Frierdiker Rebbe, encouraging the union of Tehillim Barabim, etc. At the back of in that kuntras, there's a whole story of the Tzemach Tzedek where he was. So let's read this one little piece. At the meal on Simchas Torah, when they were singing the Alter Rebbe's Niggin before benching, so the Tzemach Tzedek said he saw his grandfather, the Alter Rebbe, and he said to me, Kois shel brocha, the cup of blessing, ton hagbo tefach min hashulchan, should be raised a tefach, a handbreadth from the table. The Kois shel brocha shel David, shehu sefer HaTehillim, and the cup of blessing of David, which is the book of Tehillim, Magbiya tefach, it raises us all a tefach, umevatel kol hatet ketrugim, and this annuls all the decrees which are negative things, all the accusations, etc. Tikba asher yoimru b'chashoy kol yoim b'hashkomo lo yeuchem ashor avius kol hatehillim. And you should institute. The Tzemach Tzedek had been very anxious about something which he saw on the horizon, and in this vision, the Alter Rebbe tells him, this was already from Rosh Hashanah, he was very, very anxious, and on Simchas Torah, the Alter Tzemach Tzedek now says that my grandfather came to me, and he said, you should say Tilim every day early, no later than from 4 o'clock, Miashor Revi'is, should say the whole Tilim for 53 days, and this will erase the kitrug, this decree against Klal Yisrael. So if you want to read the full story, it's there. It's also been, this kuntras has been translated into English. It's called On Saying Tehillim. Meanwhile, the Rebbe, our Rebbe, as he was his style already over several years, once he became responsible for the publication of the Frierdiker Rebbe's material, he would very often add notes. Mostly references, but also other comments. So here we have a comment of the Rebbe. On this which it says that the cup is raised a tefach from the table. You make Kosh Shabrach is raise a tefach from the table. So he gives us a reference to Shulchan Aruch Siman Kuf Pei Gimel Siv Dalet. Umin Hogenu, however, our minig, as written in the Haggadah, which the Rebbe had published, he doesn't say the year, I think it was Tafshin Zayin, approximately several years earlier, some 6 years earlier. So in the Haggadah, the Rebbe had already written that the minig is to to raise the cup of wine of Kiddush, 3 tefochim, gimel tefochim. So we have here a little bit of a contradiction. Here it says in Shulchan Aruch to raise the cup of tefach, and minhag Chabad is to raise it 3 tefochim. Perhaps that is as an extra measure to raise it 3 tefochim, but min hadin is enough 1 tefach. With this we can reconcile in a simple way Shetzorchli is gavoya zeres. In the Zohar, in one place, it says to be a zeres, it should be raised. Im shebekam mekaymis, or I'm skipping the brackets, we'll come to that in a minute. Bekam mekaymis, gambazer gufa, it says she is salki tefach. Elsewhere in the Zohar, it says the same as the Gemara, the idea of tefach. So before we go further, let's go down to the bottom of the screen. And we have here from the Zohar, which the Rebbe referred to the first Zohar, it should be held in the right hand, I guess. It should be raised from the table. Shiuro de ikri zeres. It should be raised as zeres from the table. And that's v'nisam mikvois. All right, the shat in the Zohar is another discussion, but meanwhile, he says it should be raised as zeres. Now, coming back now to the brackets. That the meaning of zeres, the translation of zeres here too, is 3 tefochim. Ukemeshekosov v'sefer oir hachamo. Oir hachamo is Rebbe Avram Azulai. I was a grandfather of the Chidah, if I'm not mistaken, and he also says that zeres means literally 3 tefochim. Unlike what is written in another sefer called Itor Soifrim, who wants to say that the zeres in the Zohar should be translated as a tefach. So back to the next line. The Eir Hachamo, as they say, is a commentary on the Zohar. He says, how would you work out 3 tefochim? It's a tefach. He says, well, the tefach itself, the table itself is a tefach thick. As you have by the shulchan, you have mizgeres tefach. Then you raise the cup a tefach, and the cup itself is a tefach. So from the top of the tefach to the bottom of the thickness of the table, you've got 3 tefochim. That's the solution of the Oir HaChamo to reconcile the zeres measurement to the halocho of a tefach. And the Rebbe says that's doichak, it's an awkward shot, kamuvim, which is obvious. And then the Rebbe goes on, it says, furthermore, you look in Gemara Psochim Daf Kuftes, there's a whole discussion about the shiur revius. And there it says, the Razal, the typical, the default cup of Razal, it talks about the size of a revius. It says it's gavoya le'erech gimel etzbois. It's about 3 etzbois high, and diameter of 2 etzbois, and that's how it works out in the Gemara exactly the shiur of a revius in dimensions, not rather than in measuring in liters, etc. So meanwhile, in that Gemara, you see that the height of the kosher bracha is 3 etzbois. Tefach is 4 etzbois. Therefore, that's another question on the likelihood of the pshat of the Oir HaChamo. So meanwhile, the Rebbe is saying we have taka. One place in the Zohar, it says zeres. Elsewhere in the Zohar, it says tefach. And so on. So the answer is that there's lechatchila lehidur, there's an extra. And then there is the the halacha is a tefach. What came to what was brought to my attention is a correspondence between Rav Zevin and the Rebbe. And this is published, as you can see, in Igros Kodesh, volume Chav Gimel. So the Rebbe writes to him, Be'inyan Zeres. I'm going to bring the Rav Zevin's letter in a moment. You should Kedai L'Tzayin L'Hasider V'Kiyotze Boi V'Chol Hamarbe B'Simonim L'Torah Reza B'Shubach. So this note of the Rebbe, which we just read from the back of the Tehillim, about 10 years later, 12 years later, the Siddur Imdach was published, was reprinted, and in the Hosofis at the back, there are some 15, 20 pages of Ha'oras V'Tziyunim, largely put together by Reb Level Grona, Olav Shalom, and this note of the Rebbe is also quoted there. And Rav Zevin, he's referring to that note in the Siddur, which is the same note as which we have over here in the Tehillim. It's exactly the same words, and he struggles with it, and we'll see in a moment, he's challenging the Rebbe's explanation, and therefore he's wondering. His Rav Zevin is the editor of the Encyclopedia Talmudis. At that time, he was working on volume 12 of the Encyclopedia Talmudis, and there is a section on an entry on Zeres, and what is the definition of Zeres? And so generally a Zeres, as we know, is a half an amor, but there are other, how do we translate the Zeres here in the Zohar? And he struggled with the Rebbe's pshat, and he's asking the Rebbe, since I'm not happy with your pshat about Zeres, should I refer to it, or should I kind of not refer to it altogether? And the Rebbe says, it's okay, refer to it. Don't worry, refer to it, to this reference in the Siddur, and the more cross references in Torah, the better. So now let's read what Rav Zevin writes to the Rebbe. Be'inyan Zeres, I see in the Siddur in Dach what you had written about the minhag in the Rebbe's house to raise the cup of Kiddush, Kodesh HaBaracha, 3 tefochim. And I also saw this some time back in the Haggadah Shel Pesach, which the Rebbe had published. And I guessed at the time that this was based upon the Zohar, which says Zeres. And now I've been delving into editing the entry of Zeres in the encyclopedia, and I made a note in the notes, the references, and I had guessed that you had been referred to that Zohar, the 3 of Zeres, but 2 places else in the Zohar it says tefach, and that's in the Gemara and the Poskim. Therefore, Rabbi Zevin is convinced that in the one place where the Zohar says to raise it as Zeres, you should translate the word Zeres tefach. To support this, though, he brings a Targum Yerushalmi to explain. There are basically 3 Aramaic translations which we have of the Chumash. We have Targum Onkelos, which is more literal. We have Targum Yerushalmi, which is more of an explanation rather than just a literal translation. And then there's another Targum called Targum Yerushalmi. In some Chamoshim, the Mikros Gedolos, you'll have it there. At any rate, the Kohen, the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol, is measuring a Zeres. It says Zeres Orkoi v'Zeres Rochpoi. So the Targum Yerushalmi translates it Peshoch. And Peshoch, we know, is a tefach. So the breastplate, according to the Targum Yerushalmi, the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol is a tefach al tefach square rather than a 3 tefochim square. V'chein kosav. By the way, it makes it cheaper that way. Imagine that all the stones now can be much smaller. With the stones of the Choshen, it's a much smaller thing, so they can be smaller stones. But then it's more of a struggle to be able to read the messages on the Choshen. Okay. V'hainu tefach. So he's giving us a reference to the Targum Yerushalmi that we have here, a precedent that the word Zeres is translated as tefach. And he gives a reference to also the Sefer Itur Sofrim. And he says, no, the Rebbe had written Itur Sofrim, and it's actually Itur Sforim. Okay. That he also, as we saw before, that the Itur Sofrim, or Itur Sforim, I didn't check it up this time, he says that Zeres means a tefach. So Rav Zevin, he says, I've got these 2 sources to translate Zeres as tefach. And now in the Siddur, I see Das Kodshe, how you've learned that Zeres means Kipshute, 3 tefochim. Omnom, Kosav Kain, Shazel Piazoy, Kosav Zeres. Yes, I see now that I was suspected that you had said 3 tefochim is based upon the Zohar, but you didn't quote the Targum Yerushalmi. Now, in other words, the Targum Yerushalmi says it's a tefach, so perhaps that would explain the Zohar instead of making a contradiction in the Zohar. Therefore, since I haven't printed this yet, I'm asking, should I give a reference to the Siddur? But then, if I do give a reference to the Siddur, I will then have to add Tzorech Biur. I'm not satisfied. Or perhaps I should, perhaps I shouldn't, because I'm not satisfied. Better not to refer to it and not to write Tzorech Biur. That was Rav Zevin's communication with the Rebbe. So the Rebbe writes to him, this, so you can see his answer. Refer to it. Don't worry. And kol hamarbe ben simonim l'toyer harezim shubach. So this is the conversation, a fascinating conversation. I just want to add to you that some time back I'd written about this whole topic, and someone referred this to me this past week to my article that I'd written a couple of years ago, which is included in the Siddur Habo Aleinu L'Toivo. So now in the new edition you'll have there the following. When it comes to kinyonim, there's one of the kinyonim is hagbah, to lift an article. You lift an article, that's a way of acquiring it. How much is the shiur hagbah? This is a machlokes Rashi Tosfos. I think Rashi says it has to be a kinyan of 3 tefochim, lift it 3 tefochim, and Tosfos says that it's not enough to lift it a tefach. If I got the names switched over, all right, but there's a machlokes Rashi Tosfos about this. So, what is a kinyan? Is a kinyan a show of ownership, or is a kinyan to exclude others? And there's a Kiddush-cup in Vayeitzei in Chelik Yud Beis. There's a discussion about Odom Arishan, about him not bringing korbanos min hagezel. So there's a svara there to say that kinyonim are only needed to exclude someone else. If the Rebbe brings a source there, Odom Arishan, you mustn't bring a korban min hagezel, because Odom Arishan, Odom ki yakriv, he didn't bring a hagezel, shehakoy lo yosheloi. So, suggesting that the concept of kinyan is only when there's a challenge. When there's a challenge, you have to do a kinyan. But if there's no challenge, everything's yours. So this is a question, what is a kinyan? Is a kinyan a positive statement, or is it a negative statement? Is a kinyan to negate others, or is it to demonstrate that it's yours? So Rashi, who says that kinyan hagbos is gimel tefochim, so I think Tosfos comments that Rashi is because of lovud. Up till 3 tefochim, it's still attached to where it was. So you have to disconnect it. So the kinyan of hagbos is to disconnect it from where it was, and now it becomes yours. Tosfos says it's enough a tefach. It's a demonstration. You want to show, and for that is enough. A tefach is enough to demonstrate. It's significant enough to be a demonstration of ownership. So here we have 2 ways. Now, so when I saw this, it struck me, it's very, very interesting that we have here a machlokes about kinyan, with a hagboi 3 tefochim or tefach, and then we have 2 opinions about picking up the kotz shel bracha, 3 tefochim or a tefach. Possibly the following: there's a difference between Friday night and Shabbos day. Friday night we make Kiddush standing. Shabbos day we make Kiddush, whatever, make Kiddush sitting, lift himself a little bit. Lav davka exactly, but that's negotiable. Friday night, the Shabbos is negating Yemei Sachel. And therefore, Friday night, it's Gimel Tefochim, because it's like, it's to disconnect from the weekday. Therefore, you're standing, and therefore, your cup is 3 Tefochim away from the table. Shabbos day is to say, Shabbos is a Choshev day, but it's not an Inyan of Shlila, it's an Inyan of Chiyuvi. That's Shomer and Zocher. And therefore, Shabbos day, you can make a kid. If you're sitting, no one sits by the table to hold the cup 3 Tefochim from the table. When you're sitting, you just lift it a tefach. So Shabbos day is the inyan of. So that's another way of reconciling the 2. Although the Rebbe doesn't say this at all. The Rebbe just makes a difference of lechatchila and lehidur, and the basic din is a tefach. But just another possibility of saying that that's where the minig is of 3 tefochim. That is badafke by night, when the lifting of the kos is like a stepping away from your Yisachel. Okay, not negel halocha, but just a geschmacke conversation. Okay, let's move on. So, someone asked me about Tiki torches. So, some years ago, I put together a list of guidelines for public Menorahs. And amongst them, this is published for different few places. And one of the things I'd said that gas lamps are not okay. So gas lamps are not okay. The reason is because the way the gas lamp is, like electricity, we know that electric electric, like fluorescent, is not fire. It's a gas which glows. Um, Neon is already long out of fashion, yeah, or LED. These are not. There's no fire there. Therefore, that they're not okay for Hanukkah. They're Hanukkah. A gas lamp, if you don't know the details, so you get the impression is like the gas fire in your kitchen, so it's a real fire. But the Metzias is not like that. The gas lamps is a very beautiful white light, and that is that you have inside. There's like a cloth bag. This cloth is impregnated with a glowing material, a certain powder, and there's a little burner over here. This little burner heats up the atmosphere inside the bag, and that causes the particles to glow. If that's the case, it's not a light of a fire, it's a light of a glowing material, and therefore it's not valid for Ner Hanukkah. So then they asked the question, what about Tiki torches? So I had to do a bit of homework. What are Tiki torches? So Tiki torches, the way I see them here, are basically bottles and a thick, bottles filled with oil and a thick wick. My impression was it was like even a square centimeter, wide width. And you can raise it out of the container and it lights, it gives light, it gives warmth. So those I see no problem to use for Ner Hanukkah. There, just to be careful, there's also I see on when looking around, there's solar Tiki torches. So this is the real one. And then there are those which are powered with solar power. And then it looks like it's fiddling, as if there's a flame inside, but that's just electric replay on solar power. And obviously, that's not a flame, and that wouldn't be okay. But these ones, which you see here, which is a wick with oil and a flame, that's kosher for Ner Hanukkah. Let's move on. Oh, so this, in case you have, all right. So what we have here from the Piskei Teshuvos on Tafresh Ayin Gimel. So where he writes this, that you wouldn't be yotze with you wouldn't be yotze with gas if there's no wick, if it's just gas, and certainly you wouldn't be able to use electrical ones. So it needs to have a wick and a flame. Yes. Now then, what I found though interesting is what he writes further. V'shas hadchak, when there's no way you can use a naked flame, there are the consensus of G'dolei Hatorah that you could use a battery-powered lantern, not neon, not fluorescent, not LED, but if it has a tungsten. So a tungsten is called a wick. It's like a wick. Why dafke with a battery? There is a halacha that when you light the menorah, there has to be enough fuel for it to last for the half hour. When it's connected to the power, to the mains, there's no container. You don't have a container of half an hour of power. Whereas if it's powered by a battery, so you do have, what's the difference whether it's energy in the form of oil or the energy in the form of a battery? You have half an hour energy there. And therefore, if you cannot, for whatever reason, can be relevant for people in the hospital, etc., then they would allow you to make a bracha on a battery-operated menorah, provided that the bulbs are tungsten rather than fluorescent, etc. Very interesting. All right, let's move on. So now, very common question that can you be yotze menorah not in your own house? And for years, I had been under the impression that you would not be yotze away from your house. And the way it's written in Shulchan Aruch is that if you are in the same town, you have to go home. You cannot be yotze lighting somewhere else. And this can be a bigger issue. Like let's say if you have the children who live, let's say 20 minutes away, half an hour away from the parents, and they want to come for a menorah, but they want to be there when the Zadie lights the menorah. Perhaps that's also helpful for the Hanukkah guilt, I'm not sure. But meanwhile, they want to be there. And but then what's going to happen with their own menorah? and then Tati can't eat. Then Bobby invites them for supper, but they can't eat supper because they haven't lit menorah, etc. It becomes an issue. So therefore, I was very pleased to see that there are those who say that, despite that we've said you have to go back to writing your own thing, yes, there are those who write that actually bias, although it says neir ish or beisoy, it's not really dependent on your physical bricks. And let's say if a person's camping during Hanukkah, would they be able to light menorah on the campsite obviously with a lantern which is going to be windproof, etc. So there are those who say yes, he's saying this, and taking this a little bit further. So I'm just going to take out the Nite Gavriel, and this is a Nite Gavriel on Hanukkah. So chapter Yud Aleph. So he says, if you go with your family to eat supper by your relatives, the Chatchila, you should go home and light at home, or you should light in your house before you go out. But then he writes, if it's difficult for you to get home because of the effort with the children, yesh lismoich, you can rely on the lenient opinions to light in the place where you're eating. And the point which he says in the notes there, he says the following. The idea why it's important to light in your home rather than elsewhere is also because you don't want people to passers-by to suspect that you didn't light menorah. That's all very true for those who light the menorah outside the house or by the front door, etc. But those who light the menorah inside, so then people are passing by don't know any difference. And therefore there's no chashad from the outside, and the family are with him. So if the family would be home and he's by in a different house, so then the family don't see the menorah. But if he's with the whole family, so then there is room to be makel, to light the menorah even away from home. 2 points which come to which now become easier for me to understand. There is in the Rishimus about the Rebbe Rashab would, after his father passed away, he would light the menorah by his mother. And for years it bothered me. And he's missing out on lighting in his home. But now that I'm seeing that that's the idea of beisoy is not mamish so crucial, and probably the Rebbetzin probably would have been very upset to have to light her own menorah. So he mamish lived next door. I'm sure he was there every day. So he lit menorah by his mother, which is in Yav Kibbutz aim, etc. The other point which came in, it was also, for years I've been struggling with the lighting of the menorah for travelers. You go out in Eretz Yisrael in the airport, and also in Kennedy, you have the Chabad at the airport, and they have their table, and before you go into the plane, you light the menorah and you go onto the plane. Now, the practicality is that most people, in many instances, it's not shaykh to light at home and catch the plane, because still you get a couple of hours, etc. Whatever. So I never really felt comfortable about this. Now that I'm seeing you can light one. Now, last year in the Der Herr magazine, they had a story of a particular, I think it was a judge, and he meets the Rebbe, and there's a conversation about the fact that he had lit the menorah in JFK a few months earlier, and it looked like the Rebbe was happy with it. And so now that seeing this view, that it's the beisoy is it is a little bit, there's a little bit of latitude there. So I understand a person is not able to light at home. So then, if he lights in the airport, perhaps he stays there and has something, stays there for a few minutes, whatever. Of course, you're going to have to now work out how does that fit with the din that the shamus, the gabe, whoever who lights the menorah in shul, has to go home and light menorah again with a bracha, with all three brachas, etc. Why is he not Vayeitzei with the lighting in the shul? All right, we have to work on that. But at least what we're seeing, there is an opinion, a view of poskim, that there's a little bit of flexibility on have to be dafka his bias. Let's move on. Okay, so now a shliach somewhere in France. So he is. I'll just give the background. He is in the Chabad center. They have a separate minyan for Sfardim. It's a Sfardische minyan, and he is the Rov. His father is the shliach and has another minyan for the Beis Chabad, but this is a Sfardi minyan within Chabad premises. And sometimes then there's a few young men who their families have been involved. Unfortunately, there's these three boys, young men, who are married out. One of them is a Kohen, and the other two are Israelim. And so he's been giving them an aliyah, and the people of the shul are protesting and saying, how can you give an aliyah to someone who's married out? That is the question. So we've discussed this in a few times. What I can say is that the poskim do take a strong view not to give an aliyah, because poskim, as I mean in recent generations. We're not talking about poskim as in Rishonim or even early Acharonim. We're talking about later poskim, and they see this as a kind of sanction. Person married out, I could give an aliyah. So I just saw now Baruch Oberlander when he just published a volume called Omar Baruch Oberlander. So he published a volume there. He has a tshuva about this, and he says he wants to met with Rav Wosner. And the question is, if the not giving an aliyah is going to actually alienate them, so then what have you achieved? And I'd also like to refer to, in his Omarova, he refers to an article which he's published. We have a volume called Shalos Tshuvos Rabbona Europa. There's an excellent study of the whole attitude to Mechalelei Shabbos, etc., as far as are they part of Klal Yisrael, not part of Klal Yisrael, in various applications for Aliyah Torah, etc., etc. Very, very good piece. He quotes there from Rebbe Joachim Schlesinger, Khan Rosh Hashivas, who says he was once in Switzerland with Revelva Brisker, and they were short for a minyan and for Kriyas HaTorah, and there was someone in a nearby hotel, but he wasn't Shema Torah mitzvahs, and Revelva said, bring him in. He relied on having him as a center. Now, if you're looking for kanoim in the Brisker Welt, Revelva is pretty kanoi. He brings also from Bihil Kolomaya, who in his time in Hungary, whatever, was known as one of the most outspoken kanoim, and yet he also allowed Mitzaref Mechal Shabbos to a minyan in the small shtetl in the villages. So there's background to this. So on the other hand, you have to be sensitive to give them an aliyah every week, etc. It may be offensive. It depends which sibur it is. If it's a Chabad house, so that's where we're there for, to be mekarev. And other shuls, you have to live. If it's a Meledes, a Yortzeit or something, if it's a special occasion, there's certainly room to be mekel. But we to be sensitive to the people in the shul, that they shouldn't see this as they are, somehow not being respected. As a Kohen, this is another point. As a Kohen, if a Kohen is married to a Grusha, he's forfeited the privileges of Kehunah. If he's living with a Goita, so she is also got a din of Zoina, etc., and therefore apostle Kehunah. So as long as he's married to a shiksa, so then he wouldn't be allowed to duchen, etc. Doesn't mean you have to make a fight about it, but you wouldn't be able to give him a heter to duchen. Okay, let's move on to something, in a way less painful. Flying trampoline. So this happened this past week, somewhere in the British Isles, and the fellow has a trampoline in his front garden, I presume, and a very powerful wind lifted his trampoline over an 8-foot hedge. and it landed on a car, or somehow I think it lopped off a wing mirror. And before the police came, it was just 7 o'clock in the morning kind of thing. He asked his Rov, am I liable in Halocho? And so I got this a message in the morning. So looking just from Halocho, I'm not talking about what's the civil law, I don't know. So here we've got the four forms of shiur and boy, mave, hedge, shein, regel, etc. So here we have in Shulchan Aruch, in Chesed Mishpat, you've got beir. Beir means literally a pit, a ditch, which are made in the public domain, and something fell in there. The Torah talks about that if you dig, and then you'll be liable for the damage for an ox or a donkey. So that's the boir literally. Then we got tuldos haboir, which means subsidiary categories. Avnoi sakinu masoy, your rock, your knife, your burden, and you left them in the public domain, and they cause damage. So it's an obstacle rather than a pit. So that's another variation of that. Then it talks about if you left them berosh gagoy, if you left your knife on a rooftop, and they fell beruach metsuyo, and they fell with a regular wind, and they cause damage, so then you are liable. But then Sif Beis says, if noflu beruach she'eino metsuyo, if they fell due to an unusual wind, unexpected wind, and they cause damage, or afilo achan afilo caused manch, or it caused damage once it landed, but you didn't have a chance to take away the danger, so then you're potter. Later, for later, you're bechayev. But meanwhile, what we're seeing here is a damage because of an article of yours flew due to an unusual wind, then is your potter. So al pi halacha it's potter. In civil law they may say you're liable. Civil law doesn't recognize Hashem, and therefore they don't say, oh, Hashem sent. They say either you're liable, the owner is liable, etc. It's you owned it, you must be liable. In Torah, the Eibishter can cause someone a loss, Rachmana litzlan, and it's the Eibishter kind of sending it. It came through someone else. That person is not liable. It doesn't. In other words, there's not mechuyev. It's not imperative that there must be someone who's liable. In the civil law, they have to find someone who's liable. In Torah law, it's not imperative that there's someone who's liable. Also, the liability then remains with the victim. Okay, that's one point. I want to just throw another interesting thing. I was sitting at the Kiddush and sitting next to a Rov from Montreal, and we were talking about sukkah. I'm talking about in sukkah we have a din that if the sukkah cannot withstand a ruach metsuya, then it's not a valid sukkah. So then the question is, what is the definition of ruach metsuya? So I told him that actually there's a Rambam in Pirush HaMishnah in Bava Metzia, and it talks about shmira, guarding an animal from running out and causing damage. It says ruach metsuya achas lishnayim u'shloisha yomim, or shloisha arba yomim. It's a kind of wind every few days you'll have such a wind, which means in that context, if it's something which is, occasionally it's, you are in tornado zone, but that's not achas l'shleisha yomim. That would not be called a ruach metsuya, even though in this region these things happen. I don't know whether you could extend that to over here, because it's if it's a windy time of the year, I think you'd say that he is liable. I think here would say he's not expected. He doesn't expect this to happen, and therefore he would be potter. Okay, let's move on. Right, so here's a tricky question. A Jewish man, he's a jeweler, and a Jewish man comes to him. He says, I'd like to buy a ring, and is schmoozing a bit, and it turns out he's marrying a non-Jewish woman. So he's asking, am I allowed to sell a ring to someone who will use it for marrying a non-Jewish woman? Am I accomplice to the Aveir? I have a bigger question. I think perhaps we discussed it before. If I am a travel agent, am I allowed to sell a ticket to a Jew which is for travel on Shabbos? At any rate, it's a little bit similar, but I think that's a worse problem. And here we have a source in Dogel Mervava on the Shach in Siman Kuf Nun Aleph and Yeredeya, where he says, is there a mechiyuv to prevent a person there's a mitzvah of lifnei ival isit and michshel. You mustn't support a yid doing an avera. But he says, if a yid is doing avera b'mezid, so then, according to the Shach, you're not mechuyev to stop him. Very, very interesting. Now, what do we have here? Now, here this quote here is from the Alter Rebbe in Hilchos Ribis, and it talks here about lending money to a mumer, and then you'll pay him ribis. So he says, a mumer sheyotza min haklal, linya ribis shemutar lahalvoise beribis. You're allowed to lend a mumar money, and he'll pay you ribis. Why is that? If his body is hefker, and you're allowed to mutar abdoi, how much more so his property, his money is hefker, and therefore you're allowed to get his money. That is to lend the mumar beribis. But to borrow from him beribis, in Sif Ayin Zayin, is also to borrow from him, and you'll pay him ribis. That is, everyone would agree that is forbidden. In the previous one, there's yesh omer, not allowed to. But meanwhile, but to borrow from a mumer and pay back in ribis is forbidden. And he says bishum v'lifnei iver, and it says lo sashich. There's a issur of ribis not only for the lender who's charging ribis, but also for the borrower who's paying ribis is also doing an avera. And a very interesting lashon. Although he is not called our brother, what we are brothers to him, and therefore he is not allowed to. He's not allowed to take ribis from us. But what I'm just pointing out here is the Alter Rebbe throws in here mishum v'lifnei iver. He's a mumer, yotzim min haklal, and he says there's a lifnei iver. So contrary to what the Shach seems to be saying, that there's no issur of assisting a mumar, a person who's dropped Torah totally. There's no issur of helping them to do an avera. The Alter Rebbe seems to be saying here that there is a issur of lifnei ivri besides the lois asher. What I would still say that I told him that actually, you know what? This fellow is marrying this, he's living with this shiksa. Whether he marries her or not makes no difference. The avera of living with a shiksa makes no difference. Doesn't give her a ring, doesn't give her a ring. And they are in that relationship in any case, whether you, and besides the fact you can get rings anywhere else. But the point is that the giving of the ring is actually not how do you say, is not enabling the avera. The avera is being done even without the ring. So that's, I felt he's not really accomplished for an avera. Can you sell food to someone? So I put in the chat. Can you sell food to someone who will eat it on Yom Kippur? You might eat it Erev Yom Kippur. Can you rent a house out to someone who will watch TV on Shabbos and has got a plug? And I must share with you that someone once challenged. This is one of Rabbi Zion Hackner's Oliver Sholm's one of his favorite quotes. Someone asked the late Rav Padver, Rabbi Heinech, asked him, how come you give a hechsher on the Normandy hotel when they've got TVs in the rooms? So he said, ja, ik heb dem hechsher of dem essen. Geen wollte ich euch gesehen, ob ich wollte gegeben a hechsher für alles was zitzig in the Zimmern. I give a hechsher on the food. I'm not up to taking a hechsher on everything going on in the rooms. Someone asks here, is there a difference that the trampoline was not well screwed down the garden? The history is that trampoline had been there for about 6 years. So whether it was screwed or not, I don't know, but it was pretty safe, and the movement was obviously okay. Now, coming back to the saga of the fellow with a cup of coffee in his car. and we talked about shinui mokim, that switching from one location to the other warrants a new bracha. And as a result, someone asked me, and we discussed it a couple of weeks ago, that he gets into his car in the morning, a cup of coffee in his car, and as he's driving, he'll stop at a petrol station and he'll go out the car to put in petrol. He may go into the building to pay. When he comes back to his car, does he have to make a new bracha on his cup of coffee? And I'd said a few arguments to say that he doesn't need to make a new bracha. And one of them was a din of halachic drochim, that halacha that halachic drochim don't have an issue of shinui mokim, because the whole concept of shinui mokim is that you started off in a mokim kavua and then you went somewhere else. But if you are the chatchila start off as without the kaviyas, then there's no problem of shinui mokim. That was the point which I'd said. So I got a couple of strong emails challenging me on that. Perhaps the whole din of halachic drochim, not having to make a new bracha, is only to do with bread, which is so in bracha achrona b'mkoimoy, but not by other foods, and some other tainas. So, just Hashgacha Pratis, I've just been learning this sugya in Gemara Psochim, Daf Kuf Gimel, I think it is. And then on Wednesday morning, I was in Golders Green in the shul, and they're learning the sugya also. They're learning Kufay and Ches in this whole topic. I just was encouraged to look at it more carefully. Okay, so now what we have here, first of all, on the screen, let's go al Seder. The first quote we have is from the Chaye Odom in Klal Nun Tes. He says, if you are in a field, let's say, and then there's a agola, there's a wagon which pulls up, and you get onto the wagon. If you didn't have this in mind, then once you're in the wagon, you're going to have to make a new bracha because of shinui mokim. You made a bracha in the field. Now you've gone to the wagon, you'd have to make a new bracha. The Mishnah Brura in Sharat Sin in Siman Kufay and Ches, he quotes the Chaye Odom, Mistapek ulai af me oretz lagolo, is also considered a change of place, and ve'ein nira lahachmir kol kach bazeh. I'm not so convinced you have to be so machmir that it's considered a change of place. So Reb Chaim Kanievsky is quoted as saying that the wagon which the Mishnah Brura was talking about is an open wagon, and therefore it's not a shinui mokim. But if you go so according to him, if you're standing by a bus stop and you started eating some crisps, and then the bus arrives and you go into the bus, so then you're going to have to make a new bracha when you go into the bus because it's a shinui mokim. So long as you were in the open air, so it's halachic drochim. You don't have to make a new bracha. But when you go into the bus, then you've gone into a bayis, and that's shinui mokim, and you have to make a new bracha. Now, having said that, that's what he says. But what I'm seeing here is a few others. We have here a quote from Oyer L'Tzion, Rebbe Tzina Bar Shaul. Interesting style of his tshuvas. They're like chapters and bullet points. So he writes the following: if you started eating on the street and then you want to continue in the car, or if you started eating in the car and you're now going out of the car, you're allowed to continue eating. You don't have to make a new bracha. So he's not seeing the car as a shinui mokim, and it's you can argue both ways. You're in the car and the windows are open all around you. So the scenery is the scenery of halachic drochim. On the other hand, there is an element of privacy in the car. So there's two ways of looking at this. And obviously, Chaim Kanievsky was seeing that going to the bus is a structure, therefore it's got walls, it's a bias. And the others are saying it's still totally exposed or very much exposed, therefore it's still called halachic drochim, and you don't have to make a new bracha. And then this other quote is from a sefer called Vayeitzei Habrocha, also contemporary, says you started eating in the car, and you go out of the car, and then you continue eating. You don't have to make a new bracha. Because eating in the car has got a status of eating whilst you're traveling. It's called, so sitting in the car is also halachic. Is alluding to Rav Elyashiv, by the way. That's what I saw quoted. Now, different would be if you, let's say you sat down in the car is parked, and you sat down there to eat your lunch. And then you go out of the car. That's a different story, because then you use the car as a kind of cabin, as a private place, and then it would go into the union of halachic. And then he goes but then it's an interesting thing. He says, one who ate it whilst it's in the car, whilst it started traveling. So now again, if you say that sitting in the car is koveya, is kavua, so then what happens when you start the car and start driving? If you just said that sitting in the car and you go out of the car is called a shinimokim, what about if you're sitting in the car and you drive off? So he says, no, that's not called shinimokim. So he's kind of tans of zwei bedachasnes. He says, since you're still on the same floor, the car underneath you, the floor of the car is underneath you. Therefore, it's not called shinimokim. So then, to going from the street into the car, he doesn't see that as shinimokim. You're still a halachic derech. If the car is parked and you go out of the car, then he sees that is a shinimokim. But if you're staying in the car and drive off, he says it's not a problem of shinimokim. Which I can see the logic in that. What I'm seeing here is that it's going to remain a sofik bracha. Yeah, whether going to the car, whether traveling in a car is called a mokim kavua and going out of the car is a shinimokim, or it's all considered halachic. It's going to be a sofik bracha, because I can see contemporary poskim are arguing about this, and therefore we're going to use the principle of sofik brachas lahakel. Another point which I was challenged was, which I'd said that when you go to pay, so you can see the car, and therefore that's so long as royas and mekoyim, it's not a problem of shinimokim. So one of the correspondents said, that if it's the other side of, if there's a Rosh Hashanah in between, that creates a hefsek. Well, I don't think when you pay for a petrol in a petrol station, the space between your car and the house where you pay, I don't think that's called the Rosh Hashanah. It's not as if there are many people passing by in front of you the whole time. I think one can, again, at least, suffer brachas lahakel, not to have to make a new bracha. Okay. After I sent out the list of questions on Friday, I received the following question. How do you deal with a jumble of sforim? Is there, taking out a sefer from a jumble of sforim, is it a problem of Byron? And this is from some website. You can see the quote on top of the page. That this website is saying that the issue of Byron with Sforim is only when they are similar in appearance. But when they are different shapes and sizes, there's no problem of Byron. So he's asking, according to this, as he sent me a picture, he's got here on his table a Shulchan Aruch and Hayom Yom and some others for him. If he on Shabbos wants to pull out the Hayom Yom, not to use it, but to put it on the shelf. Let me explain something. There's boirer taking bad from good, which is always asur. There's a boirer which is from good from bad, which is allowed samach l'seuda. There's boirer which is sorting out. Let's say Friday night you've washed the cutlery and you want to put the spoons in this compartment and the knives in that compartment. That's sorting. Is sorting an issue of boirer? So the Alter Rebbe does not address this clearly, explicitly, but the general view is that sorting good from good is allowed for immediate use. Sorting good from good for delayed use is the same as taking good from bad for delayed use. And therefore there's issue of sorting like there is an issue for la'achazman. So again, coming back, we've got here a jumble of sforim. And now to take out a sefer to use, no question, that's okay. But to take out that sefer to put it on the shelf, doesn't need it now. It does come into a question about it. So now, looking at the Shmiras Shabbos Gilchosa, I'm not sure which edition you have. Unfortunately, my Vayeitzei HaChochma started causing trouble on Friday, so that's why I don't have quotes of it on the screen. But here I'm reading from Shmiras Shabbos Gilchosa, chapter Gimel, which is the chapter on Boiler. And so he has like this. You have a bookshelf, and you want to take out a sefer. You want to look at it later. You don't need it now. So, actually, I see here he is machmir, but in the newer edition, he says to pull off a sefer off the shelf. Let's say it's Friday night, and you want to take out a sefer off the shelf and chumash, which you want to use tomorrow. So in the newer edition, he says that's okay, because there's no jumble there. They're on the shelf, and each one's got a title. So if let's say you had a bunch of chamoshim or whatever, some of them are torn or some of them aren't, some are good, and you're sorting out, you're taking a good one from that could be a problem of boiler if you don't need it right away. But if they are Masuda on the shelf with the titles are visible, to take one off the shelf is not an act of boiler. That's what he writes in the newer edition. But on the other hand, when you have a whole pile of Sforim jumbled together, and to sort them out from there, they are jumbled, then to pull them out, not for immediate use, would be a problem of boiler. And he tells us a practical story that a Friday night at the coastal Marovi, there are thousands of Yidden who come, and you have, or hundreds, whatever, it doesn't matter, and you have Sidurim, you have Svardish Sidurim, Ashkenazish Sidurim, Lubavitch Sidurim, and you have Teman Sidurim, Italian Sidurim, etc., etc. And you've got this Sadranim, the people who it's their job to make a Seder, and then for the next morning you expect to find everything in Al Makoyma Yov V'Sholem. Sorry to borrow that term, Kohen don't know what I'm talking about. So he says actually they can't, they're not allowed to Friday night sort out all the Ashkenazis during here, because they bring them all, it's all a jumble, and to start sorting them out, that wouldn't be okay. And therefore he has an appeal that all the Ashkenazim should put their Sidurim back on the Ashkenazi shelf, and all the Sfardim on the Sfardi shelf, and in that way, Ish al Makoyva Yove V'Sholem, I wish you all a good tefach, and we should hear a Besoros Tovus, Yeshua is with Nechomos. We should hear good news from Acheinu Bnei Yisrael in Gaza and in Eretz Yisrael, and we should have a Geula Shleimet Mashiach Tzedkenu Al Yohu Malach Habris should come be Mevaser the Besuras HaGeula. Matzah Shabbos is already able to come and tell us, so she would hear the Besuras HaGeula. Meher v'yameinu mamash. I got to work.
Amen.
Very nice. Quick.